you can only be great if you really know how small you are. You can only be huge, if you know you're tiny. And if you have gifts and you have talents, it's okay to acknowledge them, as long as you acknowledge them with grace that, this has been given to you. And so, you are not, well, for me, I always say, I am not walking alone. And all the things that I have, the things that I've been given, the talents, whatever it is, for me, it's just, by the grace of God that I have these things. And so I'm very happy to share whatever I have with the world. And not, I want to say it took me a long time to get to this place, because I was almost embarrassed of my strengths in a lot of ways, because I thought, who am I to, have this strength or that strength, or, whatever it is. And I felt like I had to kind of hide myself. I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like I can really be out in life and be present and stand in my power. And it is all okay. And it is all wonderful, because at the same time, I know that it is, it's just grace that I have all of this, and, and I can be so happy and so humble about it. And it allows me to be able to really, stand firm, which is a huge gift.
Welcome to Can't Be Uncensored Podcast, Season 3, Episode 10, Part 1, with Nancy Yusim Steinberg. What an incredible interview. It really is something, as this community and episodes and interviews continue to move forward into our Season 3. I feel so fortunate to be able to sit down and have this conversation and conversations and connections. That exactly reason why we created this platform, because gathering around the campfire and having authentic connections and conversations is magic. It's where the magic happens. And it is amazing to sit down with people that you came up with in different ways and parts of your life, and to get the most rich exchanges together over a period of an hour or two is just like lightning in a bottle. So join me, pull up a chair, grab that cannoli, because here we go.
Hi.
Glorious, gorgeous you.
Oh my gosh, Felicia, how are you? Oh my gosh.
I had so much going through my head regarding
what's going through your head. There's so much going through mine also.
It's all about the kepi.
It's all about the kepi. It's so true.
Yeah.
Well, it's about the kepi and the heart.
Yeah, 100%. And I was thinking about it because I thought, wow, there's so much that I go backwards about regarding you, and then present to me. And, going to your wedding and coming back to me. But I want to like kind of start from the very beginning and come forward. Are you open to that?
Yeah, totally. Yes. But I was actually just telling someone about my wedding. But we can get to that.
Okay, good. Because I want to hear all about your perspective. Because there's always two sides of that story. So but great parts, because of our memory and what have you. So I believe that you and I met in 1982 at Beloit College. Okay. I think it was 1982, because I didn't come until, this is classic, I don't even know if you know this. It was my third school, my third university.
Of course it was.
Of course it was. I was like a wandering Jew. And, but not intentionally, because I started out pre-med fine arts. And I started out with the University of Illinois, but at Rockford College with a segment of their individual program for medical illustration. And after 2 years and working with surgery and all these people, I ended up going, oh, this is not going to use my talent, even though I know I'm a realist artist and all these things. And my mom and I kept like thinking like a photographer and filmmaker. And my mom was like, you need to go to Columbia College. So I got into Columbia. I was the only woman in my class. I wanted to be a female director, and I wanted to be the next Annie Leibovitz. Nobody knew who Annie Leibovitz was at the time. And went there, was sleeping on people's couches, all the things, doing really great. And then my sister Andrea, of all crazy things, because of the Reagan era, if she wasn't in college, by the time she was, if she wasn't full blown in college, by the time that like mid her senior year, she would not receive her Social Security benefits that we were receiving as kids because of our father being deceased.
Yeah.
And that would have meant no college because there were no funds. It was like a chocolate mess of financial circumstances.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so my mom said to me, even though I was finally getting my confidence back after a series of events over the 4 years between 15 and that time, my mom said, wherever Andrea goes, you've got to go. And I was like, you got to be kidding me right now. Like, I'm just finding my footing. I'm getting straight A's. I'm finding my voice, my vision, my everything. No, yeah, you've got to go wherever she goes because you've got to be with her. And so somehow or another, Andrea ended up at Beloit. And then I, went to get into Beloit, and I'll never forget the admissions officer saying, well, you just keep moving around. And I looked at her and I went, you don't even know what the, fuck the situation is. And don't even come at me like this. Because at that point I was like the lion red. I felt like I was being a cornered lion. And I was like, I don't even want to be here. And I was like, and so don't tell me what I can and cannot do. And so with great resistance, I came to Beloit. And at that point, I had all my fine arts requirements under my belt. I had all my basic liberal arts under my belt. It was like, what am I doing here? And how did I end up in Beloit, Wisconsin, of all things?
Yeah.
And then Andrea left after her first semester there and went up to UW-Madison. And I was like, are you effing kidding me right now? Like, seriously. Now I'm here, and she took off. And truthfully, Beloit was the sweet spot for me because it ended up pulling back a curtain and like pretty much laying like kind of seamlessly, sweetly in its own kind of weird way, kind of laying the foundation or kind of like the bridge to where I would end up going. But what was so fascinating and what I loved about it was, unlike Rockford College and unlike Columbia, I felt like, oh my God, I met my people. Smart, international, thinkers, explorers, expansive minds, expanded their minds with and without drugs, all the things, including my sweet Nancy. But I'll never forget, Nance, you and I hadn't really become friends yet. And I ended up, I'll never forget, and I don't know if you remember this, somehow or another, I had been given this coat that I don't even remember. I want to say it was Jeremy. I don't even know Jeremy's last name. He was like a little hustler. I don't know how he got your coat, but I didn't know it was your coat. And I was given the coat. And you came into like the Commons or something and was like, hey, you got my coat. And I was like, What are you talking about? I was like, I don't even know how I remember this. And you and I were like two lions.
Wow.
Yeah. And I remember being so embarrassed. And
I'm so sorry. Oh my
but
God.
not, it wasn't your fault. I didn't know. And I was like, here I grew up third generation in the schmata business. I didn't need anybody's coat, but I loved the coat. And I was like, oh my God, how did this happen? And you and I kind of had that kind of like, it was like two female animals, like kind of like figuring each other out. And I think Tracy was kind of like the bridge to us.
Yeah.
And then over time, I just, our relationship just evolved, and the community of those people. And I think I got more comfortable being there. And I just think, little did I know that, like, honestly, Nance, out of everybody, you and I, besides, like, I don't know if you remember Tracy Brown. Do you remember Tracy Brown vaguely?
Vaguely.
Yeah. But you and I have literally, like, you are my takeaway from Beloit. I mean, my longest, dearest friend that, like, I've remained in communication, even though communication goes in and out because of, we
always
came up through always ebb and flow, but we also grew up at a time that we were literally at the precipice of computers.
Yeah, I remember at Beloit when we got word processors, like 3 or 4 word processors in the library. And I thought, that is the dumbest thing. Why would anyone want to go sit in the library and work on that machine when you could sit in your room, in the comfort of your own space, and type away on your Smith Corona?
Your Smith Corona. I love it. Your electric Smith Corona. Was yours electric?
Yes, it was electric, but it was old. I had to take the every time I made a mistake, I had to take out the ink and put in the cartridge for the whiteout, whatever.
Oh my God, I don't even remember
and then
that.
take it out and put it in. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, so good.
I love how we were born, like the age that we were born and the time that we were born, because of this very kind of conversation of that, like so many things that we'll get into. But that is a great story, because it's true. I ended up, I'm just gonna cut out for 1 second, even after, because I graduated in 84. Did you graduate in 85?
85.
Yeah. Because I thought I was a year ahead of you. So it ended up that I had to come back after I graduated, because I was like I don't know what it was, 1 credit short. And I was back in Rockford, now in beauty school, because of how that all came about from Beloit.
Right.
And I had to go back, and it was computer science. That's
what you had to take?
While going back and forth to beauty school and working on heads and people's hair. So crazy. But anyhow, the beautiful thing is, how I remember things is it was right after you graduated. Well, I think of it as right after you graduated is when you went off to Israel to live on a kibbutz. Is that true? Do I remember that correctly, or was there some time span?
I lived for 1 year with Tracy after graduation in Evanston.
Oh my God, I don't remember that.
Yes, we lived in Evanston. We had a lovely apartment, and we lived there for 1 year. And during that year, towards the end of that year, I decided I was going to go to Israel for a year.
So was that in 86?
86, 87 was the year that I was in Israel.
86, 87. And 86, 87 is when I moved into Chicago.
You moved into Chicago. And then I came back.
And then you came back, but you hadn't met Dove yet.
I met Dove in 89.
And Dove and you were.
And we got married in 89.
And 89. And Dove and you. So So you were in Israel from 86, 87, lived on a kibbutz.
No, I didn't live on a kibbutz. I did 2 programs in Israel.
All this bloody time, I thought you were on a kibbutz, but you did 2 programs. Now, see, there you go. This is why we do these things. We have these conversations and get clarity.
Yeah.
What were the programs you did?
So the first program that I did was called Livnot Ulehibanot, which means to build and to be built. And it was in Sfat up in the north of Israel. And it was a very robust program. And it was all about learning about Judaism and also really combined with learning about the land of Israel and love of the land. You know, what's so funny about this program? So there was a 3-day hike on this program, and it's called Yam Liyam. It was from sea to sea. And it was the only reason I did not want to do this program. I was like, there's no flipping way I'm walking from the sea to the sea. Okay. I know myself. It's not a good plan. And when I was talking to the guy who runs the program, who's still my dear friend, I said, you know, I want to do it, but I just don't want to go on that hike.
Yeah.
He said, that's the best part of the program. People come back for years and years after. They come back just to do that hike. It's the most famous hike in Israel. And I said, yeah, you know, I get all of that. And I just know myself, and I'm just not really a hiker. And I would like to know if I could do the program and not do the hike. And he said, nope. It's part of the program. So I did the program and I did the hike, and it was hell-ish. Yeah, the first day was all in the sun, and I got a migraine, and I was like throwing up, and it was horrible. And for lunch, we had these like greasy tuna sandwiches and tomatoes, and like, I can't eat that stuff. And my friend Michael, who was on the program, his sister had sent him peanut butter and jelly from America, and he had made himself these peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I said, Michael, I need your peanut butter and jelly. He said, what? I said, I'm dying here. I need your peanut butter and jelly now. I can't eat this tuna. I can't even look at the tuna. He said, this is my peanut butter and jelly. I said, I get that. I just need you to do me a solid and just give me the peanut butter and jelly, which he did. He gave me his peanut butter and jelly and was very lovely, and, you know, whatever.
And grounded you.
Mm-hmm. So that was the first day. And then the second day was much better because we were in the shade. And even though it was like uphill and over Mount Meron, and it was, you know, whatever it was, okay, fine. And then the third day was also pretty good, but my feet were so sore. And there's something in Israel called Shemitah, where every 7 years you let the land rest. It's like Shabbat for the land. So whatever fruit is fallen on the ground, or you just can eat, it's free for everybody. So there were these banana fields we were walking through, and I ate more bananas than you could possibly imagine. I think I like almost turned into a banana. Anyway, we got to the end, we get to the sea, we all go in the sea. I'm kicking my feet out. They were so the knots, you know, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And Aaron said to me, aren't you just so happy that you did this? And I said, no. I mean, I'm happy it's done. I did it. I said, you know, like, no, I didn't want to do it in the first place, but I did it and it was good. And I did it. It was an accomplishment, you know, and I guess there was a part of me that was happy. But yeah, so that was the first program that I did. And then I did another program that was in the old city of Jerusalem, and it was called Israelite, with this amazing rabbi. His name is David Aaron. And it was an incredible program. And then I was the counselor on that program. So that was like for another 3 months. And then I spent a few months bumming around and traveling a little bit. So that was my year. It's fun.
So I want to go back to like little Nancy first before we jump forward, because you grew up in the North Shore of Chicago, right?
I did.
And your parents owned Midas.
How do you remember that, Felicia?
I don't know how I remember what I remember, but I remember.
Yeah.
And, at the time, owning a franchise or something of that nature gave affluence, gave opportunity. Your father, you did well. Because I always remember that your parents sold your house the same year my mother sold her house. And the difference in location.
My parents sold the house in Highland Park, you mean?
Yeah. They
Yeah.
sold the house in Highland Park and moved it to the city.
Yeah.
At the time that they did, I believe it was around, well, I want to say 89, but that was when my mom sold it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, I think it was around, 88, 89.
Yeah.
They were in the apartment when I got married.
Well, I figured they had to have been around the same time because I roughly remember that. But I'll never forget, like, my mother selling her beautiful 4,000 square foot home and getting dust for this beautiful home because it was in Rockford, Illinois. And your parents at the same time selling their house and basically giving them the freedom to move into the city. Not the freedom because they had the affluence, but my point is had my mother's home been in Highland Park, it would have set her free.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And so I just remember having that like life reflection of how do you play this Monopoly game called life. And and I would pay attention to my friends' parents and my friends and all the things because I was raised around money. We had money until my father had lost everything. But I want to go back to your childhood and go, okay, so here's little Nancy. Were you born and raised in Highland Park?
No, born on the south side of Chicago and lived there until 69. I was born in 62. Lived on the south side until 69 when we moved to Highland Park.
And, it's so funny that you are from Highland Park because of all the girls I went to summer camp with, many who came from Highland Park, along with all North Shore and all around the country. Did you ever go to summer camp that was a non-religion summer camp?
I went to Reform Jewish summer camp called Sarui Olansing Ruby Union Institute camp in Wisconsin. And that's where I went to camp. Yeah.
So I never went to any Reformed Jewish summer camps. I went to private girls' camps that happened to have predominantly Jewish girls. It was the most Jews I'd ever been around.
Do you remember, here, just a little funny story. Do you remember Jen Sorensen?
I remember the name.
So I used to teach synagogue in Beloit. We can go back to my childhood in a minute.
Yeah.
I taught at Beloit at the B'nai Abraham Synagogue in Beloit. And I would get up on Sunday mornings to go to temple to teach Sunday school. And sometimes I would see people scuttling back to wherever they came from, at night. I saw a lot on those mornings, not gonna lie. Saw a lot on those mornings. So one day I saw Jen's and he said, hey, where are you coming from? And I said, my room. Where are you coming from? And he was like, oh, doing my thing. I said, great. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to teach Sunday school at B'nai Abraham Synagogue. And he said, are you a Jew? And I said, well, yes, I am. And he said, I've never met a Jew. And I said, well, yes, you have actually, because he was in Beta. And I said, Scott Kleiner and Craig Belson and, and these guys, they're Jews. And he was like, no, I said, yes.
Well, and I didn't realize when you said Jen's, I didn't really hear. I'm thinking, of course I remember Jen's. Jen's and I became super, super close. So that just seems like all of a sudden I just went boop.
Right. He was a great guy.
Jen's was.
I don't know.
I have no idea either. I love Jen's. He was such a sweet guy. He was surrounded by Jews.
He was surrounded by Jews and didn't know it. It was so interesting. And we were like surrounded by Jews and knew it. It was, we were Jewish, but it was, it was very interesting, but it was fascinating to me that he had no idea that we were all Jews.
Yeah, that is funny, but I don't think we, I mean, in my humble opinion, I don't think we were walking around like, it wasn't something you had to mention. It wasn't
We
something.
never mentioned it. To me, it was just because I grew up in Highland Park. I thought the whole world was Jewish. I was stunned when I left Highland Park and found that we were a really small percentage of the population.
Versus I came from the other side of that track mentality of like, I knew we were dropping the bucket and the rest was otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I had no idea.
Yeah. So it is interesting. And certainly my first two parts of my education, I was not surrounded by Jews, and it wasn't that Beloit we were surrounded by Jews, but there were definitely several smart, sassy people that we hung with that definitely came from, they just stood out. So, okay, let's go back to your childhood. So you guys moved to Highland Park in 69.
Yeah.
It almost makes me go, how did our paths never cross before?
I know well, I know. But anyway, yeah. So I moved in 69 and, it was a hard place to grow up. Actually, for me.
Well, I think it's interesting. Then do you know people like Stephanie Brown?
Stephanie Brown.
She's now Stephanie Brown Kirch.
No.
Or did you ever know?
I remember Stephanie Samuels, remember her?
Of course. Still have actually communication with Stephanie.
Yeah, me too. She's here. She lives near me.
That she does now? She lives near you? Oh, okay. We'll talk about that all off camera. The girls that the next round of girls would be like 8 or 9 years younger than you, who all ended up becoming my campers up in northern Wisconsin. So yeah, I would think that Highland Park, if you weren't, well, I don't know what you'd have to be to fit in or feel comfortable or at ease, or what was it that you like? It didn't resonate.
So I don't think that. So I'm just finding a place where I feel comfortable and at ease. It's taken me this long, 60 years, So I did not feel comfortable and at ease in Highland Park, and even though we were affluent, everyone was more affluent, and my father was very conservative and wanted his kids to work, and really instilled in us a strong work ethic, which is amazing. And but also it was a hard time. Like it was the 70s, and the 70s were a really turbulent time in our history. And in my history personally, also it was very, very turbulent time. So I didn't fare well in Highland Park. And I ended up, I don't know if you remember this or not, but that my parents sent me to a private therapeutic boarding school.
No, I don't know that.
Stockbridge, Massachusetts. Yeah. So
where in Massachusetts did you go?
West Stockbridge, Massachusetts.
That's so interesting because I nearly went to boarding school in the Berkshires.
Yeah, it was nestled right in the Berkshires. It was, the most beautiful surroundings. The school itself, the grounds were beautiful. There was a lot of beautiful things, but it was a really bad place. It was a really, really bad place. And so when I was supposed to graduate high school in 1980, but I ended up having to stay there an extra year. And so I graduated in 1981. And when I got to Beloit, it was the first time I'd experienced freedom in years. So
that makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Wow, that is so fascinating. So you went to boarding school because your parents. Now, see, it's interesting because during the time, I didn't mean to interrupt you, during the time that we were growing up in the 70s, and you are like one of the first people that has touched base on something that I talk on all the time, which was growing up in the 60s and the 70s was such a pinnacle time in history, a pinnacle time in our household, a pinnacle time for women, civil rights, voting rights, Vietnam War, the Kennedys being killed, Martin Luther being killed, you know, what you could or couldn't do. I mean, I remember my grandmother having to sign Mrs. Joseph Barbagello. I remember my mom fighting for, you know, the rights for women to work and women's rights to their bodies and interracial rights and all the things. And it was for us, and we'll get back to you, but for us, it was by the time 74, and there was between 74 and 76 when the recession was hitting. And my parents were pretty with it people. So my mom, as a young mom, you know, really wanted to like listen to the Beatles and really wanted to be, you know, this proactive human being and integrated and all that stuff. Of course, we're going to have dogs in the background, classic. And so anyhow, so it ended up that, you know, culturally and like civic rights wise and, you know, being charitable and all those things was really, really important growing up. But I was also raised between a Sicilian Catholic household and a Jewish household and parents who were in an interracial couple for all intents and purposes, where my mom had converted to Judaism.
Right.
And all the hell she went through for that, from both sides, from the Jewish community, from her Italian community, and then my parents having their rough go of it because everybody was pulling them, and then their own tumultuousness and all the things. And then the recession hit my family's businesses, which was 3 generations of women's ready-to-wear. And by 1976, my parents divorced after 20 years. My father lost their businesses 4 months after their divorce, all of our stores, 4 stores from Northern Illinois, Southern Wisconsin. And then my dad died 5 months to the day of their divorce, September, in Chicago, where he was back living, because he was originally from the South Side and then also grew up in Rogers Park. And, you know, so, but he was on Sheridan Drive when he passed, and it was a tough time. And by the time I ended up, I was the class president, all the things you probably maybe remember, don't know. We've talked about these things off and on. But that's when I said to my mom, I've got to get the hell out of here, and you got to get me out of here. And my brother had already gone to Berkshire boarding school out in Massachusetts. And if it hadn't been for the fact that they did not have financial aid, I would have been out there. But I ended up, my mom, God love her, I don't even know how the hell she figured it out, amongst all the things she was dealing with, got me into Wayland Academy. I mean, I got myself into Wayland Academy, but Wayland was just up the way from Beloit College in Beaverdam, Wisconsin. And that's what saved my ass. And it wasn't because I was, you know, everybody at that era thought if you were going to boarding school, you were some sort of a problem child, or your parents didn't want you at home because they were like traveling the world or something. It was kind of like, that was not my situation. My situation was, I'm not going to get to college if I don't get out of here, because I'm too smart. And I know that I had a plan at 11. I was going to become a medical illustrator. So I already had a plan, but I knew at that point, it was like, I'm sinking. And that's when I started getting stoned my sophomore year, and just losing. I went from a straight A kid to CD. So I had really lost my confidence. So it's interesting. I really don't know that I remember that you went to boarding school.
I don't know that I talked about it a lot. I think I was just kind of so happy to be in Beloit and be free. really felt so free for the first time in so many years that, yeah, I think I was the happiest person there.
I think you were very happy.
I was very
I
happy.
think, and I had so much admiration for this woman, who was so brilliant and could try anything that I knew of and still like keep your brain cells together. And I was just like, I don't know how you function. I don't know how you do that. But there lies that. And I'm just, out of respect, not going into details, but I was just like, I don't know how she does it. I don't even know how most of our friends did it, frankly.
I don't know either. And when I look back on it, honestly, it terrifies me. I think I was very reckless on the one hand. On the other hand, I think, I really think I had this feeling, right? Just this feeling that things had been so tumultuous and so difficult for me leading up to this time in my life that I felt like God was on my side, that I was in many ways just had a little bit of protection with me kind of all the time. And yeah, I did. And so, not that I don't think I felt like, Superwoman, like I could do anything, right?
Yeah.
But I definitely felt safe being wild.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because that environment actually in its I can't speak for everybody there, but it really actually had a very safe feeling of an environment, a very coddled, small, safe environment.
We were friends. I mean, I was friends with my professors and, do you remember Bink Knoll?
Yeah, of course.
So I spent tons of time with him and graded his papers and, and had just the best time being in his house and, being with him and his husband and their dogs and, drinking and grading papers and just, so there was that side of it also for me, which was, yeah, a very safe place, and I felt I was very uncomfortable with many adults after going to DeSisto. I really had a very hard time with adults, but Bink was one adult that made me feel very, very safe. He was so non-threatening to me and gave me the opportunity to, when I was a junior, grade the papers of his freshmen and, all this kind of thing. And it was like a huge embrace for me. So I had that part of my life there also, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And then the wild side, but it was interesting because I always, I did well in school. I did my schoolwork. I didn't hand things in late. It was almost like, I'm still kind of like that. I like stay very on top of my stuff so I can kind of have a little freedom to, do what I want.
I'm with you there. I mean, I'm all about accountability. I was always a good little girl though.
Good. You were good.
I don't know when I felt not good, it felt really foreign to me. Or if I was around people who weren't good, that felt challenging to me. And yet I liked the dark side.
I think the thing is that you had balance, right? I did too in my way. I think, that for those of us who thrived there, right, we had a certain sense of balance that, and it looked different for everybody. But, yeah, that's how we, we made it. We're strong. We're strong, independent, we were strong, independent young women, and we were doing our thing. And it was a tough time in the world. I mean, there was so much happening. And, I don't know. So yeah, it was great for me. I loved my 4 years there. And I have a lot of really, really fond memories. And there are like very few people that I'm still in touch with, but when I do get in touch with people, or I had someone come visit me. Constance Woods came to visit me, which was so nice. She lives in Taiwan.
I was going to just ask, if she's still
Yeah,
there.
yeah, she's there. So she left early. I don't know if you remember. Her father was going on sabbatical from University of Colorado or something, and he was going to Taiwan, and she was like, you know what, I'm out. And now it's interesting, because now if you were in college and it was the same, it's not the same vibe at all. You can't just say, yeah, I'm graduating, or I'm doing whatever and I'm leaving.
Right.
Those days we were much more free than kids are today.
Oh, well, listen, things radically changed even right after we graduated. I mean,
Yeah.
I think to myself physically how free we were. We could be intimate with anybody we wanted to be. And you never were fearful of the God forbids, whether it wasn't like STDs and exist or any of these things, but you could have partners and you didn't worry about anything. You didn't worry about AIDS hadn't happened yet.
Right.
We literally left school.
When we left school.
I remember leaving school and going, what is this MTV shit? And what is AIDS? And what in God's name? And oh my God, you just can't be with anybody all of a sudden. And
change like that.
Like a flip of a switch.
And I think that the span of our lifetime has been like that across the board. I think, obviously people who were born in the, turn of the century and lived, those years, and saw, all the technology inventions, the light bulb, the cars, the airplanes, this, like crazy, the phones and computers,
Yeah.
But our life, that was, oh my gosh, it was, we went from riding our bikes outside and coming home, and Johnny Carson was on, and, that was like, every single night. Right. And then, and playing ball outside, and everybody played with everybody. And there was no, as far as I can remember, I mean, no one was really being bullied, and we all played together outside. It was fun. We were, just a group of kids, and whatever.
In neighborhoods.
In neighborhoods. And then it started to change.
100% it did. And it's interesting that you reflect on that, because sometimes I think, am I just talking out my ass? Because I know that I'm not the only that existed during this period. But my brother and I were even talking about it recently, like, and especially I think being in the film industry where there's so many generations of people that you work around. And it's not really about how old you are, it's how well can you do a job. But I can see, depending upon the generations, like women under the age of 50 just think that this is how it was. The film industry just like, I can do anything. And I think to myself, oh, no, you don't understand. When I got into this career, one, I couldn't direct films. It wasn't an option. There was nobody who was going to hand me an opportunity to direct. Females were not directing. Hell, at that point, when I was running my own photo studio back in Chicago, I, to this day, had only worked with one female photographer in the fashion world. I was one of 3 women on a film set, and I was heading my department in my late 20s. And here I was, like, men are like trying to put their keys in my fanny pack, and, leading men are trying to, there's all sorts of things that were going on that I was like, hey, man, I'm here to do a job, design a show. I was very focused as a storyteller. And I just was like, this isn't, this is not what I'm here for. But I now think women just think like this is how it was. And I'm like, no, this is not how it was. And I'm not that old.
No, it's not how it was. I mean, my mother marched on Washington for women's rights. And, I mean, that was earlier, that was, in the 70s, but yeah, we lived through such incredible decades of history, and they really are really parceled out in decades.
They really are.
They really are. And even though the 60s bled into the 70s, right, and definitely the 70s bled into the 80s, there were still, real
definement,
strong, finite decades. And we lived in those decades. That's where we grew up.
Very much so. Matter of fact, it's ironic because strangely, the 90s feel less defining, even though it was like things like the Clinton era and the Lewinsky stuff and all things, but real historical big kind of chunks in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were really defining. And to your point, when I listen, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I was a kid getting financial aid, and I was a kid getting government loans, and I knew it was my responsibility to pay those loans back 100%. No matter how you were going to figure it out, that was not my problem. That was not anybody else's problem but my own. And it took me until I was 38 to pay off my final school loan. And and in my career, it wasn't like, I was getting salary guarantees. And I don't know, currently I have very mixed emotions. I mean, I had a lot of debt from school. Relative to now, I can't say it's relative or not because it's all, but I definitely had a chunk of change that I owed that did not come easily. And I will never forget, it was one of my first few years out of college and getting a call from a school loan officer, not a school loan officer, but from the federal government who collects. And I had to pay $500 every month back to pay off my loan. That was a lot of money.
Huge amount of money.
Huge. And I remember saying to this person, excuse me, but I didn't come out of college with an Arthur Anderson job. I'm an artist. And I'm trying to get rubbed to, and Nance, I don't know about you, but my first few years, I made no more than $8,000 a year. I did not come out of school making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. Not that I think most people did.
No, we were very, we were in the era of liberal arts.
Yeah.
It's like, go read, young children, go write a paper, go be in a play, do this. It was like, I think of kids now, right, and how they go to school. They're very directed. They go in kind of knowing, a lot of them, what they want to do. And even though they might change courses, they still have way more direction than we had, or certainly than I did. And I know, like, I was an English major at Beloit. Yeah. And the reason I was an English major, ready for this, was because I was at DeSisto, the school in Massachusetts. We had to do work hours if we ran away.
Okay.
And I ran away and got arrested in Port Authority in New York City with a friend of mine. And we ended up, her mom came for us and put us on a bus, and we went back to school. But before we went back to school, we did go to a Charlie Daniels Band concert that was playing in town and had tuna grinders. And then we went back to school, and I had to do 250 work hours. Well, Michael DeSisto, the guy who ran the school, did not like me, and I didn't like him, is an understatement. But I was that feisty kid with a big mouth and a lot of energy, and I was the defender. I had my cape on all the time, and I was the defender of all the kids who couldn't speak up for themselves and this, that, and he just hated me. And after I'd done almost 250 hours, he said, now you can start over. So for 500 hours, which is a long time, I was not in school, because when you were doing work hours, you couldn't go to school. finally my 500 hours were done, and I got to go to school. And I went into a class, and the teacher handed me a book and said, "Here, read this." And he was so dejected as he handed it to me. And I thought, all right, whatever. And what was it? It was King Lear. Okay. It was Shakespeare's King Lear. And I sat down at the desk and I opened it up and I started reading it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a page turner. And I was like, what is this? And I started talking to the teacher, and he said to me, "Do you understand that?" I said, "I do." And he was like, "Psh, how?" I said, "I don't know. It's speaking to me." Right. And so when I went to Beloit, I didn't know how to do anything. I hadn't really been in school. I was lost completely. I don't even know how I got into that school. I have no idea. It was all a blur and a mystery. All I know is there I was. And I said, all right, well, I know how to read and I know how to write. And so I'm going to just be an English major. And then whatever will happen, will happen. And I had actually no more ambition, no goals, no desire to delve into the sciences or this, nothing. I was so single-minded because I was so insecure about my academic abilities, coming from this school where I really did not have, a good academic base. And in Beloit also, one thing I loved about it was that you could proficiency out of math. I don't know if you had taken math in college.
Oh yeah, I had. Yeah, I already had all that under my belt.
So they had a thing, you could proficiency out of math. And I thought, well, I can't even do math, but I'm gonna take this proficiency test. And and I remember I just prayed. I was like, I gotta just do enough math to proficiency out of math. Please, God, help me. And I did, and I proficiency out of math. And I was so grateful because, and I think about it now and I thought, well, gee, Nancy, if you could proficiency out of math, obviously you understood math on some level, right?
Yeah.
But the way I looked at it then was, I have to proficiency out of math because I cannot do math, right? My mind was so messed up from, really not having strong academic background from high school.
And it's so heartbreaking when I hear this, because when I think to myself, first off, like I said, I just thought of you as a bright light bulb, super, super smart, which you are. It had nothing to do with your truth. I would never have known your insecurities.
Yeah.
Though I've had plenty of people say the same thing to me. They had no idea the lack of confidence that I was walking around with, even though I was confident. I knew the things that I was capable of and what I'd be willing to do and all the things. But under all of that was a young girl struggling with confidence because of life things that occurred.
Right. We all, I think, I think that we're two examples of exactly that, of people for whom there was this really vulnerable, tiny, very, very small little soul, little person that really needed to be picked up and loved and cared for, and for whatever reason hadn't gotten that. And so we were standing in the place of that person, bold and confident and smart and funny and doing all of these things, right? Not because it wasn't our truth, but because we weren't or I should say that I wasn't at the level yet, or evolved enough or old enough, mature enough, whatever it is, to be able to say, oh, come little soul, I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to carry you and take you with me and everything's going to be fine, right? And so I sort of put her away and access this other part of me, and both of those parts of me are me. Both of those parts are me. And now I don't have to compartmentalize those parts anymore. Now I'm much more integrated as a person, and I can hold those parts of myself together and united. And so it's a much more beautiful thing. But at that young age, right, in our late teens and early 20s, there was no way I was letting that little chick out of the box, I was like,
Right.
there was no way. And I don't think that she could have withstood what was happening, right? I could, strong, tough, resilient,
Yeah.
for sure. I could have handled anything, and I did, right? But kept her very shielded from, all of that stuff. And so it's, the evolution of the marriage of those parts is really interesting to me, really fascinating.
I love that too.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very, I call it the human onion, the layers.
Yep. There's a lot of layers.
A lot of layers. And I call life a living sculpture.
Life is a living sculpture. It's a calder. It moves.
It moves, and you come back into the room and go, oh, I need to take a little off the tushy.
Yeah.
Or, oh, I love the way she's reclining right now.
Yeah. And you know what? Or very abstract and, colorful and playful. And it's interesting because I have spent a lot of time thinking about art and poetry actually in the last few years. And I've gotten such an appreciation for the truth of the artist and the truth of the poet, and that, whether art was valued by some objective, subjective eye, it didn't matter, right? That these brave souls, artists, brave, people who wow. I mean, I'm blown away more and more every day by art and by great literature and by poetry, because how brave to, put yourself on paper, or to put yourself in sculpture, or to put yourself, out there as really that is your truth, right? And making yourself vulnerable in that way. It's really mind-boggling, to mind-blowing. I love it. And I always, my parents were great art appreciators, and so I always had that growing up, and then being an English major or just a reader, whatever it is, I always had a great love of the written word.
Yeah.
But now I see everything from like a different vantage point, and it's not the words necessarily that impact me the way that they used to. It's the act of writing the words, right? And the act of creating something from nothing and putting it out there in the world and saying, hey, you can criticize me, you can love me, it doesn't matter, this is me, right? And it's such a raw, beautiful way to go through life. And I think that, we're all sort of like that in our own way. But I do have this, really deep appreciation for art.
Well, it's so interesting too, because even sitting here listening to you, there's just so much connection you and I have. Mm-hmm. that like I too, my parents were very culturally expansive, from live theater. I was seeing my first Broadway show at 5.
I remember that, actually. I remember that. We had that in common always,
we did. Your parents were I do believe that if our parents had met, they would have very much loved each other, enjoyed each other, had great conversations, would have had parties together, would have understood 100%. Each other's language. Same, the art, the modernism, all the things that I grew up with. I know you were growing up and around the same, all the things. I think that's why I loved your mom and dad so much. I, being an artist since I was the youngest and the littlest, and my parents recognizing and, helping guide that, and just saying like, that's who you are. I just knew my biggest thing that I was very left brain, right brained. So that's why it was science and art. And I remember my mom saying to me so many years later, I was already here in LA. I don't remember if I was turning 40 or 45. I don't remember what age it was. Might have even been 50. I'll never forget, I'm driving down the 101 to go to Chinatown to go get acupuncture or something for my birthday. And she's saying to me, honey, I know how difficult it's been for you to just choose one thing, because there's so many things you can be. You could have gone to Wall Street. You could have been a CAA agent. You could have been a leading actress. You could have been. She hated the choice that I made, but she understood the why. She understood that I went for security because of the rug being pulled out for under, even though there's nothing secure about my position, my career, zero security. But somehow I carved out an ability to create, this evolution and this life and lifestyle that, knock wood, continued to be in a situation where, I didn't become the starving artist that I was so fearful of, because there was nothing to fall back on. It was like, figure it out.
Right. That was what was ingrained in me and us. You're going to have to figure it out. And I think that, it's interesting that you talk about security and no security in your business. Security is an illusion. There is no security, right? Security is what we create for ourselves. Security is, in the people that we are and the people we surround ourselves by. Security is having our animals that we love. Security is really something very different, I think, than the typical idea of security, right? Financial security or housing security or food security or whatever it is like that. Anything can happen, right?
And
We're really deluding ourselves if we think that we're secure. We can say, yeah, I'm comfortable and it's good right now, and I'm grateful today that this is where I am and this is what I have. And I think that if we can really access that perspective, that's how we kind of get to have some peace in our lives.
but
if
that's also, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
we're
interrupt. Go ahead.
worrying all the time about more security and how we're going to have a nest egg and how we're going to this and how we're going to that, we miss what's happening right now.
To the point, I literally was going to say about staying present.
Yeah.
About staying present, and how I know that where that came on was at such a young age for me, that it was about survival mechanisms. It was about functionality. It was about the ability to bob and weave. It was about the ability to have the ability to be like a pitch hitter and multitask and show up and deliver. And all of that would come with it. But it was about staying right in the moment and being in gratitude and being humble.
Yeah.
Humble with big dreams.
Right. I mean, that's the only way to do it, really. That's the only way to be successful. You can only be great if you really know how small you are. You can only be huge, if you know you're tiny. And if you have gifts and you have talents, it's okay to acknowledge them, as long as you acknowledge them with grace, that, this has been given to you. And so, you are not, well, for me, I always say, I am not walking alone. And all the things that I have, the things that I've been given, the talents, whatever it is, for me, it's just, by the grace of God that I have these things. And so I'm very happy to share whatever I have with the world. And not, and I want to say it took me a long time to get to this place, because I was almost embarrassed of my strengths in a lot of ways, because I thought, who am I to, have this strength or that strength or, whatever it is. And I felt like I had to kind of hide myself. I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like I can really be out in life and be present and stand in my power. And it is all okay. And it is all wonderful, because at the same time, I know that it is, it's just grace that I have all of this, and, and I can be so happy and so humble about it. And it allows me to be able to really, stand firm, which is a huge gift.
Well, I think also when you, as we have had the opportunity to be fortunate enough to have now evolved through 5+ decades. And I think energetically, the world has come to a better place, though there's plenty of darkness around us. There's also a lot of light. And from an energy perspective, all we are is energy. And I think as we come into evolution of our own selves and beings, we realize we no longer are willing to dim our light. We're no longer willing to not. Though our truth was, as little girls, we would speak up for the underdog. We would speak up for what was right and wrong, and we would know what was right and wrong. And you could, and even though maybe you weren't supposed to, you knew how to, in your own way, hit that target point. And you could do it in very subtle ways that maybe nobody was they might notice, and they're either going to like it or not like it. Just like your headmaster, whomever. My flipping kindergartner teacher didn't like me. I will never forget my mother saying, I don't know what it is about your kindergarten teacher, but she just doesn't like you. And you're just
it's amazing how a kindergarten teacher could be threatened by a kindergartner.
I'm not gonna throw a revolution in your classroom, but I could if I wanted to. Right. I mean, it's like I'll never forget. And in second grade, I'll never forget. This was I was classically trained at 3 years old in ballet, and my ballerina teacher taught in French. I never took French classes. That was the only French that was ever spoken to me, was in dance classes. And she wanted to put me on toe by 5 because I was so good. And the only reason why she didn't, and thank God she was so insightful, was because I was surrounded by mirrors between ballet classes and my grandparents and parents' clothing stores. I was surrounded by mirrors, and people were always saying, it's really too bad she doesn't, she's so beautiful, but if she's that little chubby girl. I never was valued for my brain and my gifts, because I always felt like I was never fitting in, or I was never good enough because I was carrying extra weight. Well, you grew up in a Sicilian Jewish household where you're told to sit down and eat over happy things and sad things. And by also the grace of God, I never knew what it was like to be hungry. Because it was like my mouth and my hand had their own relationship. And my mouth and my hand had their own relationship probably by the time I was 3, because I didn't know how to save my parents' abusive relationship that was going on emotionally and physically, and I couldn't save them. So in the middle of the night, I would beeline from my bedroom into the kitchen and climb up into the cupboards and nurture little Felicia.
Right, because you know what? Those things, those events, they all cause trauma, and we, when we're little, and even when we're adults, and, all throughout our life, how do you deal with that trauma? Going back and trying to deal with that trauma and resolve it and move forward. It's our life's work, right? And so in the middle of that, we're trying to find out what is our purpose, right? What is my purpose here on the planet? What am I supposed to be doing, right? And how am I going to actually achieve that? Carrying the baggage that I'm carrying, how do I balance that? How do I try and, work through that? And that's the work of life. That's the work of life.
Still continues. It will end. It will not
Always.
end until the heart stops beating.
That's right. It doesn't end. And thank God.
Thank God. It's a daily question. I feel like it's my own temple of questions.
Right. You never get to say I'm done.
No, never, ever. Never, ever. And again, naturally, you're so damn delicious. I just love this conversation so
Me
much.
too.
I told you.
And I was so nervous. Oh my gosh.
I'm like, there's nothing to be nervous about. It's us sitting down, having a clutch, just like we're just being ourselves. And this is why I do this, because I think it's so important to show the beautiful way that people connect and can converse if they give themselves the opportunity. And because we're in an environment, and I do believe it goes back to just in the flip of a switch, when we were coming out of college, when a remote control came about, and you could start flipping things like this, that detachment started building into where we are today.
Yeah.
So,
it's true.
yeah. And so for me, during that early period of 1980 to 84, when I was a summer camp counselor, you know, this was like this pure form of finding Felicia, where I always said it was like the wealthiest I ever was. I mean, I felt so rich because, and it was probably the opportunity where I got to be a mom or an aunt and all the things, and be my art, be my heart, be my caring self, be a leader, be a teacher, you know, raise people up, bring people up from, you know, from all different aspects of whatever life things that they were being traumatized from. There wasn't anything I didn't already know by then, because I'd already lived it by the time I was 18. So I had perspective, which coming forward is why I launched the Can't Be Uncensored platform of the podcast, because over the years, too many people started telling me, you really need to write books. Like you need to tell your stories, because people can't believe. And it's not like, oh, I'm important. That's not my point. My point is because, and I think you relate to this, it's like when you walk with empathy and yet you walk with the sensitivity of a seer in a very humble sort of way because of your life experiences. You know, going back to boarding school, I had earned, I was just talking to my boarding school mate about this, ironically, who's a veterinarian attorney and now becoming a deacon and gay. Came out in 1980 to me as telling me this. And she and I were talking about this. I ended up in a room my first semester with like 8 other girls. I walked into a room where they were all drinking, or most of them were drinking. And our dorm mother walked in on us. I had nothing to do with the liquor. I had nothing to do with the purchase. I wasn't doing anything, whatever. But because I was guilty by association, I ended up having to go in front of judicial board.
Wow.
And I ended up losing my medical illustration internship in Chicago. That was a big deal. And there I was already on financial aid at the boarding school. And I was already working every day because I was working off my tuition. I was the only person out of that whole group that got busted that day.
Wow.
That had to come back to school in the winter term and work off my stuff. Because I don't know, some girls never came back. Some girls, I don't know what happened to each individual. And I was saying that, you know, I remember thinking I can't get kicked out because what am I going to do? Like, and here's my mom, 42, you know, a public school teacher making $8,000 a year, raising 3 kids. My father died with no life insurance. And this is what I asked for, to come here, and I got this opportunity, and I'm just about to be awarded becoming a proctor and all the things. What have I flippin' done? And it wasn't until the following year when I came back my senior year, and now I've already like gotten leads and plays, and I'm going for like the top art awards and all these things. And my dorm mother pulls me aside day one, coming back to school, and says, I know you had nothing to do with that.
Got chills.
She said, I know you had nothing to do with it. And the fact that you gave up what you gave up, I knew. And I looked at her like, wow. And she went, yeah, I know what you gave up. And I think she had, it's really interesting. I think in her own way, she respected me for the fact that I just was this integral person. And I just took the road like, all right, well, I'm there by association. I'm not going to rat on anybody. I'm not going to throw in the towel. I'm just going to, okay, well, this is the price I had to pay for being there in the wrong time.
That's a crazy story. That is a crazy story. Because you have to wonder, like, what are the circumstances of the other people and why, and she knew. So what was that about, for her? And, I always wonder, like, was that repair for her in some way? Was it just an act of, was she just angry, or was she just, or whatever, or was it an opportunity for you to just be your true self and just take the high road and just say, okay, I am just absolutely going to make the best out of whatever comes my way, whether it's my fault or not. It is what it is. This is what's happening. So, when you're present in what's happening, you just go, because
well, it's interesting because I've chosen an industry where a lot of that kind of stuff goes down.
Yeah. I think though, a lot of stuff like that goes down in
life,
every part of life.
Yeah.
You're just talking about the marriage of so many different personalities and egos and, just all sorts of stuff. People who think they have strengths that they don't really have, and people that are fearful, and people that are not living in truth, and people who are afraid to lead with their heart, and people, there's all sorts of people out there, and you put everybody together and it's like, it can be crazy. It can be frenzy. And that's where, for me anyway, in my life, I have to really know that the way that I walk through life is that I do lead with my heart. And that has been a very vulnerable and sometimes dangerous place to be. And I found that there have been serious repercussions to living that way. And yet I have chosen again and again to be authentic and to live that way. I don't lead with my head. I don't lead in other ways. I'm very heart-centered. I am just a very heart-centered person. And embracing that has been a challenge for me. And saying it out loud is a challenge for me, right? And at the same time, I'm so happy and grateful to be that, and to be able to lead that way, and to be able to walk that way in my life. It's amazing. And you know what? There are always people that can't see it, or that don't want it, or feel, kind of insecure around it, or whatever it is. And you know what? It's okay. It's all good. I just have to do me and be me, and whatever the consequences of that are, that's what they are. And you're the same way, and you've always been that way. And so even in that situation, you were just like, okay, you know what? This is what's happening. I'm not going to scream and cry. I'm just going to move the way I need to move and go through it. I'm not going to go around it. Can't go over it or under it. Just got to go through it. And I think that is very much, a truth that we share, is that going through things, you just have to hunker down and go through them.
Oh my God. When I heard back this interview, to pull forward some of the golden nuggets spoken, I'm like, you're going to sit on the edge of your seat for this next part, not because we're all that in a slice of bread, but because of the authentic conversation that we had. And I just know as a kid growing up, these were the kind of conversations I love, being a fly on the wall. And that's why I love this platform and love gathering these friends of mine together and experts together and exchanging these conversations for these very reasons. So stay tuned for this coming next week's drop, my part 2 with Nancy Yusim Steinberg. It's going to be a chock full of more fun moments. So wait and take care. In the meantime, have a great week and come back next week for more of the same of this exciting magical gathering of lightning in a bottle with my dear friend, Nancy Yusim Steinberg. Much love. Bye for now.